The Arcane Archer is all about living the dream as a magical archer in a D&D campaign. With a quiver full of trick arrows, you have something for every situation. So why should you play this subclass? Well, let's find out. This guide is based on my personal experiences and opinions. I won't be going over basic subclass information because you can probably read. I've either played or DM'd for all the fighter subclasses, and my opinions almost certainly won't align with the D&D community at large. I will be ranking the subclass based on 5 criteria. I'll be scrutinizing subclass features gotten at later levels more intensely, because most players aren't going to make it past 10th level with a character, so my analysis is weighted more towards earlier subclass features. With all that out of the way, let's begin. Firstly, I gotta touch on the strong central concept that the Arcane Archer provides. Most people can wrap their head around being a magical archer, but you can also reflavor this subclass to be more of an artificer to resemble someone like Green Arrow. But the ability to understand this subclass's core conceit really helps lend to the roleplay, especially for new players. You are a fighter with 8 types of special arrows that you can shoot. And not only is the concept of that easy to understand, but the ability Arcane Shot is really easy to use. You've got 1 use of a special arrow per turn, and 2 uses per short or long rest. Each of the arrows is tied to a specific school of magic, like one is tied to illusion magic, another enchantment, and another evocation. Now you might be asking, alright, well, which are the best options? And quite frankly, I think all options are good options. There's not one option of the arcane arrows that I think is terrible or unusable. Actually, the complete opposite. I think each and every one of these arrows is incredibly useful. They all feel good to use, which I think is one of the most important things when judging if you should play a subclass. Will you have fun using their core abilities? And the answer is a resounding yes with the Arcane Archer. Sometimes. And we'll get to the situations where the Arcane Shot can be the biggest drag on this subclass, but when you actually get to shoot the arrows, it's fantastic in my opinion. The best thing I can say about this subclass is it gets you feeling like an Arcane Archer. You're shooting magic arrows and they're curving in mid-air at certain points. You're feeling like Green Arrow. Sometimes. We'll get to that, but again, when this subclass is firing on all cylinders, it is a blast to play. I think 7th level is really where the Arcane Archer begins to come into its own because you get 2 very important subclass features, Magic Arrow and Curving Shot. Magic Arrow just means that all your arrows are magic and they can overcome resistance, and technically immunity to magical attacks. But Curving Shot is awesome. So if you miss an arrow with Curving Shot, you can spend a bonus action and have the arrow curve to a different target. After 7th level, it is so rare to completely miss a shot with an Arcane Archer, because you can just bonus action curve the shot into another target. Again, these are really fun abilities to use if you are playing an Arcane Archer. The designers here with this subclass really got the feel right. And I have to say, for the love of God, take Sharpshooter and other feats if you do decide to play an Arcane Archer, because Sharpshooter works fantastically with literally all of these abilities. At 7th level, Sharpshooter into Curving Shot feels disgusting. That -5 to your attack roll becomes insignificant after a point, because you're essentially rolling with advantage on every one of your rolls. Also, let's stop talking about combat for a second, because the Arcane Archer actually does provide some utility. See, in the lore of the Arcane Archer, this specific subclass relates to an elven style of archery. And once you enter this style of elven martial tradition, you gain proficiency in either Arcana or Nature. And on top of that, you gain either the Prestidigitation or the Druidcraft cantrip, 2 of my personal favorite cantrips. So no matter what, you're gaining that extra bit of utility. And I think this has been a huge fault in fighter subclasses over the history of D&D 5th edition, where you really only focus on combat and give the fighter little to no out of combat utility. Since the core fighter class doesn't give any out of combat utility, it falls to the subclasses to provide that. While Arcane Archer lore isn't much, it is something to just help bolster your character when you're not shooting arrows at enemies, which for most D&D parties is a majority of the game. Alright, now let's talk concepts for your Arcane Archer. And we've touched on it a bit because I think the concept really speaks for itself. Magical Archer, an Elven Archer. magically infused elven sharpshooters who use either their arcane knowledge or their knowledge of nature to fight and smite their foes. But we can go beyond this. The way you're reflavoring the empower of your arrows can say a lot. Let's say you want to have a bunch of trick arrows and be more of an artificer. Or perhaps this power actually comes from another entity, like an archfey. You're their champion archer going about the world spreading their name. You're gaining glory as a champion before eventually planning to return. There's not a ton of wiggle room with this concept, unlike a lot of other fighter subclasses, but that doesn't mean you can't come up with cool and unique characters for an arcane archer. Now though, let's talk about multiclassing, and I'm going to be honest with you. I think multiclassing with an arcane archer is a must. I think there are arguments to be made about multiclassing at 3rd, 5th, or 7th level, but I don't think there is any reason to continue playing this subclass after 8th level. I say 8th because there's a natural off-ramp after your ASI. This is due to some inherent design flaws with this subclass that we'll touch on later. What you have to know though is that other classes like the Ranger or the Rogue make great additions to this subclass. I like the Ranger in 2023 because it gives even more utility to the fighter class. This is done through its spells and the host of other out-of-combat abilities that the class provides. Plus, many Ranger spells also relate to ammunition. So you're just boosting your archery ability more and more until it's going to reach these staggering levels of power. Or you could go with a Rogue, which does many of the same things but in different ways. You're gaining these powerful class features like Sneak Attack, Cunning Action, Uncanny Dodge, and Evasion. Plus, expertise is always a fantastic thing to pick up for out-of-combat efficiency. And after Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, Rogue has picked up Steady Aim, giving them advantage on an attack roll. So that makes sure you can get your sneak attack off, and of course, if you're rolling with the Sharpshooter feat, well, you're going to be more likely to do that additional damage. Both of these classes meld so well with the Arcane Archer. And so if you reach 3rd, 5th, 7th, or 8th level and you're really not feeling the subclass anymore, those are probably the two that you should look at to hop off and multiclass into. As long as your wisdom score is 13 or higher, you should be able to multiclass with both classes. Now we have to get into the part of the video where I talk about what I dislike with this subclass. And in this series, I try to be as positive as I can with these subclasses. But that's really hard with the Arcane Archer because this class is fundamentally misaligned with how D&D is played. A lot of the things that this subclass does just don't make any sense. Like for instance, it buffs the damage of your arcane shot, which you get at 3rd level, at 18th level. What? Most D&D parties are never gonna get that far. They usually end at about 10th level. And the damage boosts aren't even all that great. They're like an extra 2d6 damage for most of them. That is nothing when you're fighting ancient dragons, elder brains, and Tarasks. Additionally, the arrow save DCs for all your arrows scale off of intelligence, making this class unnecessarily multi-ability score dependent. And this is my biggest problem with the subclass. 2 shots, 2 uses of your arcane shot per short rest are not enough. You need to be taking more short rests than most warlocks because you need your arcane shot, else you're just a basic ass fighter. 2 uses of Arcane Shot cripple this subclass. Because remember what I've been saying all throughout this video, when you get to use your Arcane Shot and when you get to use these abilities, it is a fantastic subclass. But you don't get to use the abilities very often. It's like Arcane Shot is something they just expected you to use every once in a while, when it is the point of the entire subclass. Are these arcane shots more powerful than, I don't know, a battle master's maneuvers? No, of course not. Then why can you only use these shots twice when, I don't know, a battle master can use their maneuvers like 5 times per rest? When you start comparing the Arcane Archer just to other mid-tier fighter subclasses, you realize it is completely outpaced. And that would be one thing if this was theory crafting, but I have seen it in actual sessions when players don't want to use their arcane shots because, well, what if they'll need it for later? Or heaven forbid, they fire one of their arrows, the creature on the receiving end makes the save and succeeds. That is such a huge blow to an Arcane Archer for a save that already is not going to be very high because, again, it scales off of intelligence. It does not make any sense. And another egregious misstep is that you only know 2 out of the 8 arcane shots at the beginning when you choose this subclass. All of these fantastic options, and you get to choose 2 of them. Everybody points to the Purple Dragon Knight, otherwise known as the Banneret subclass, as the worst fighter subclass in D&D 5th edition. Hot take maybe, but the Banneret is much more fun to play than the Arcane Archer. I have players that have actually really enjoyed playing the Banneret. I have enjoyed playing the Banneret. I felt like I wanted to pull my hair out when I was playing an Arcane Archer. This is the worst fighter subclass in my opinion. Now, when I'm running for a player that really wants to play an Arcane Archer, I use the following buffs. The Arcane Archer starts out knowing 4 arcane shots. That is double the amount of shots. And over the course of the adventure at each of the designated points where they can learn 1 more arcane shot, they do. If they go all the way to level 20, an Arcane Archer will learn all 8 of their arcane shots. This is completely reasonable. Also, the way I run Arcane Archers, they can use each shot once per short or long rest. And if they score a critical hit, they can refresh 1 use of one of those arcane shots. This usually averages out to an extra shot, maybe 2 per rest. But honestly, it encourages an Arcane Archer to actually shoot their shot, because if they have 1 shot used, they'll always have something to refill if they score a critical hit. I've had an Arcane Archer go from level 3 to level 15 using this set of rules. It was great. They had a much better time than other Arcane Archers that I've ran for in the past. And was it overpowered? Did I break the game by doing this? No, it was a middle of the pack fighter subclass, about as good as like a Rune Knight. But I would argue that the player had more fun than the average Rune Knight player I ran for, because the Arcane Archer's subclass features are so freaking fun. If I was rating this fighter subclass purely on how enjoyable it was to use its subclass features, this would be near the top of the tier list. But I'm not doing that. Let's get to the ratings. We've got 5 categories: roleplay, offensive, defensive, utility, and X Factor. Roleplay is a 15 out of 20. I think this is the best part of the Arcane Archer. Its concept is solid, and being able to roleplay attacking in combat with these specialized arrows is great. For offensive, that's going to be a 13 out of 20. It's a bit above average. The subclass can add some extra damage from things like Bursting Arrow, or you can debuff enemies like with the use of the Shadow Arrow. However, it's not an offensive powerhouse that is going to be dealing a ton of extra damage on its own. You'll have to rely on feats like Sharpshooter for that. As for the defensive category, I'm giving the Arcane Archer an 8 out of 20. Some arrows like Enfeebling or Shadow Arrows are powerful debuffs to avoid damage, but as a whole, this subclass really doesn't add a lot for protecting yourself or protecting others. You're going to have to really be strategic and tactical to do that. And since most of your defensive abilities require saving throws, there is no guarantee they'll actually work. And this is only compounded by the fact that you only get 2 shots, 2 uses for most of your time playing an Arcane Archer. As for utility, it's a 5 out of 20. Arcane Archer's lore provides some extra proficiency in spells, but that is the only thing giving the subclass points here. Other fighter subclasses bring far more utility than the Arcane Archer, and they do it over multiple levels and multiple features. And finally, the X Factor. What sets the Arcane Archer apart? What special thing gives it its unique flavor? The Arcane Shot, of course. Originally, I had this X Factor a little bit higher, a 5 out of 20. But even over the course of this recording and ruminating on my experiences running for and playing an Arcane Archer, the X Factor just isn't present in gameplay. Most of the time, it feels like you're playing a pretty basic fighter up until 7th level. And since most parties don't make it past 6th, you're telling me that you picked a fighter subclass where you feel like an average fighter most of the time, and it's as if you never picked a subclass at all? Yeah, I have to give this X Factor a 1 out of 20. The Arcane Archer's core feature just cannot be used often enough. It's not impactful enough to make it go any higher. For most of the time, it's like you're not even playing an Arcane Archer, and players tend to hoard their arcane shots. So in the end, I have to give this subclass a 40 out of 100. It is the worst fighter subclass. Now you can still have fun but at later levels you are falling way behind. Now, if you want to play a better archer subclass for a fighter, check out this video right here. I promise if you play this subclass, you'll have a much better time being a ranged character than you would if you were just a straight arcane archer. And thank you for entering the dungeon.